There are films that thrill, films that entertain, and then there are the rare few that leave viewers quietly wondering whether something inside them shifted while the credits rolled. These weren't experimental art projects screened in underground theaters, nor hypnotic tapes designed for psychological study. They were ordinary sci-fi releases available at box offices, on cable reruns, and later on Blu-ray. Yet for reasons no one has ever fully explained, audiences reported reactions far beyond what cinema is expected to provoke. Some said time felt distorted, as if the movie ended sooner or lasted far longer than it should have. Others described waves of déjà vu so vivid they could recall specific shots before they appeared, almost like remembering a dream they hadn't dreamed yet. A few insisted they slept differently for days afterward, slipping into scenes that echoed the film's color palette or repeating lines they barely remembered hearing. And, in rare cases, viewers claimed they forgot entire sequences, as if their minds simply refused to register certain images the first time around. Psychologists, filmmakers, and editors have all tried offering rational explanations: color grading that influences mood, rhythmic cuts that mimic meditative pacing, low-frequency audio that alters spatial perception, but none of these theories account for the strangest detail. Many of these effects were reported only from early theatrical or VHS releases. When the same films were restored years later for Blu-ray or streaming, the sensations vanished. Scenes felt flatter, the rhythms more ordinary, the atmosphere less dreamlike, leading some fans to insist that something was changed, even when no official record shows it. Tonight, we open a file of 15 sci-fi films that didn't just tell stories about altered consciousness, they seemed to disavow. Induce it. Whether psychological illusion, technical accident, or something harder to define, these movies left traces in the minds of those who watched them. And if you decide to revisit them after this, pay attention to what changes in you. 1. Stalker 1979. Among all films reported to alter perception, Stalker remains the most quietly powerful. Early viewers often described leaving the theater in a state of contemplative disorientation, moving slowly, as if the film's pacing had rewired their internal sense of time. Some said the world outside looked desaturated for hours, drained of color, in the same way the film's landscapes appear washed by rain and industrial decay. Others claimed they felt a lingering tension at the edges of their awareness, as though the zone itself had followed them home. Many reports mentioned déjà vu not of specific scenes, but of feelings. People described sensing they had lived certain moments before, walking past a puddle, hearing distant machinery, or entering dim hallways that triggered uncanny familiarity. Psychologists proposed that Tarkovsky's long takes induce low-level trance states, allowing the mind to drift and attach personal memories to the slow, hypnotic imagery on screen. Yet even they were surprised at the consistency of these accounts. When Stalker later received digital restoration, fans immediately noticed a difference. The newer version was visually cleaner, less grainy, and more evenly lit, but missing the texture that once made the film feel alive. The faint color fluctuations, the subtle exposure breathing, and the analog imperfections of the original Prince elements that may have contributed to its psychological effect were gone. Viewers of the restored edition praised its beauty, but rarely reported the strange temporal or emotional distortions associated with the early showings. Rumors persist that the original reels suffered chemical contamination during processing, producing organic irregularities that enhanced the dreamlike quality. Tarkovsky himself hinted that part of the film's soul cannot be reproduced, though he never elaborated. For those who experienced the theatrical cut, Stalker wasn't merely a film, it was a shift in consciousness, slow, heavy, and quietly profound, as if the zone had opened a temporary passage in the mind. 2. 2001, A Space Odyssey 1968. Few films have generated as many reports of altered perception as 2001, A Space Odyssey. From its first screenings in 1968, viewers described sensations ranging from time dilation to mild dissociation, particularly during the Stargate sequence. Some said the tunnel of color felt physically overwhelming, as though their bodies were being pulled through it. Others claimed they temporarily lost awareness of the theater altogether. Several viewers insisted the sequence lasted far longer in memory than it did on screen, an effect that puzzled critics and psychologists alike. Many early accounts mention lingering visual distortions, People described seeing faint after-images of geometric patterns when blinking, or noticing subtle color halos around streetlights hours after the film ended. A few even claimed they heard an internal echo of the Ligeti choral cues, especially the sustained dissonant notes used during the monolith scenes. These reactions were so widespread that some theaters posted warnings not for content, but for intense sensory experience. When the film was restored for later formats, especially high definition, longtime fans noticed a shift. The Stargate sequence remained visually stunning, but lacked the overwhelming bloom and slight imprecision that once made it feel like an unfiltered hallucination. Projectionists from the era claimed that the original 70mm prints produced fluctuating light intensities that amplified the hypnotic effect, subtle shifts absent in digital transfers. A persistent rumor suggests that Kubrick intentionally pushed the film's exposure range to the brink of instability, producing micro-flickers undetectable consciously but influential subconsciously. Whether or not this was deliberate remains unknown. Official documentation simply notes unusual optical demands. What is certain is that the earliest viewers walked away feeling transformed. For them, 2001 wasn't just a cinematic experience, it was a perceptual event, one that bent time, expanded awareness, and left audiences unsure where their own thoughts ended and Kubrick's vision began. 3. Solaris, 1972. When Solaris first circulated through international festivals, audiences described a strange heaviness that settled over them. Not sadness, not fear, but a psychological gravitational pull that lingered long after the film ended. Many reported that time inside the theater felt unusually slow, as if the film's meditative pacing had somehow synchronized with their internal rhythms. Several insisted their dreams that night were tinted with the film's muted blues and drifting camera movements, replaying empty hallways or gentle ocean ripples with uncanny clarity. Some viewers experienced a more unsettling effect, emotional déjà vu. They claimed the film created memories of moments they had never lived, lost conversations, blurred glimpses of loved ones, or half-remembered places that resurfaced days later. Psychologists attributed this to Tarkovsky's use of long takes and associative editing, which bypass logic and appeal directly to subconscious emotion, but even they admitted the intensity of the phenomenon was unusual. When Solaris was restored decades later, many fans agreed that something essential felt missing. The high-definition transfer sharpened details but diminished the misty softness that once made the film feel dreamlike. The grain patterns irregular, breathing, alive were subdued. Even the ambient hums that filled the quietest scenes seemed cleaner, less enveloping. A few cinephiles argued that these imperfections were crucial to producing the altered states early viewers described. Rumors circulated that the original reels carried unintended optical distortions caused by chemical inconsistencies in the film stock. These distortions, though subtle, may have produced the shimmering effect. Some viewers recalled seeing around characters or objects an effect nowhere to be found in later editions. For those who saw Solaris in its earliest form, the film felt less like storytelling and more like a psychological tide, slow, relentless, pulling the mind toward forgotten memories and unfamiliar emotions, leaving audiences unsure which thoughts were theirs and which the film had quietly implanted. 4. THX 11381971. From its earliest release, THX 1138 generated a peculiar category of audience reactions centered around sensory disorientation. The stark white environments, echoing corridors, and oppressive sound design produced an uncanny sensation of emptiness, one that some viewers said lingered for hours after they left the theater. Individuals described entering public spaces and feeling as though the world around them had been stripped of color or emotional weight, imitating the dystopian sterility of the film. A few even reported brief moments of visual overexposure, where bright surfaces seemed to glow unnaturally. Many viewers also experienced temporal distortion. The film's abrupt cuts from clinical quiet to chaotic noise created a rhythm that disrupted linear perception. Several people claimed they couldn't recall transitions between key scenes. They remembered the emotion, the tension, the coldness, but not the sequence of images. One viewer said he felt as though he skipped forward several seconds without realizing it. Psychologists noted that sensory deprivation themes, when paired with minimalist visuals, can affect how memory encodes time. The transition to Blu-ray, however, softened these reports. The remastered version, cleaner, darker in certain scenes, and with rebalanced audio, felt more like a controlled aesthetic experience and less like a psychological experiment. The flickering imperfections of early prints, including uneven lighting and analog sound fluctuations, disappeared. Some longtime fans insisted that the raw theatrical presentation was essential. Without the unstable textures and sharp audio peaks, the film's unnerving sensory footprint faded. Rumors linger that George Lucas experimented with sound layering techniques meant to subtly mimic the effect of confinement, including low-frequency hums bordering on infrasound. Whether intentional or accidental, these elements created a peculiar resonance with early audiences. To those who experienced its earliest form, THX 1138 wasn't just a story about a controlled society. It briefly induced the feeling of being controlled, perception narrowed, senses muted, and time slipping in quiet, sterile increments. 5. The Man Who Fell to Earth 1976. Early viewers of The Man Who Fell to Earth often described the film as unsettling in ways they couldn't articulate, not frightening, just cognitively misaligned. The fragmented editing, dreamlike dissolves, and sudden shifts between calm domesticity and surreal imagery led many to report sensations of mild derealization after leaving the theater. Some said the film made them feel as though conversations around them were slightly delayed, as if speech and perception had slipped out of sync. Others claimed they experienced momentary déjà vu when seeing reflections or glass surfaces later that evening. Particularly striking were reports about memory distortion. Dozens of viewers insisted that they remembered scenes involving Newton's alien technology differently upon rewatch. Certain objects appeared larger, lighting tones shifted, and even Bowie's gestures seemed altered. While the film is known for its non-linear structure, the extent of disagreement among viewers suggested something more than simple confusion. When the film was restored decades later, fans noticed significant differences in atmosphere. The Blu-ray version felt smoother, more stable, and less erratic. Some attributed this to improved color timing. Others believed the original theatrical prints carried unintentional flicker and inconsistent brightness that heightened the surreal, dissociative mood. Several enthusiasts insisted that these imperfections played a crucial role in generating the uncanny perceptions reported by early audiences. A rumor long circulated that director Nicholas Roeg experimented subtly with exposure pulsing variations, too slight to be consciously noticed, but strong enough to create emotional disturbance. The technique was never officially confirmed, though certain early reviewers used unusual language, describing the film as breathing or shifting under the eyes. For those who encountered the film in its initial form, The Man Who Fell to Earth didn't merely portray an alien struggling to understand humanity. It made viewers feel, however briefly, like strangers in their own world, minds tilted by a story that refused to obey familiar rhythms. 6. Altered States 1980. From its earliest screenings, Altered States left audiences reporting sensations far beyond conventional cinematic intensity. Several viewers described a peculiar shift in bodily awareness during the deprivation tank, sequences tingling in the fingers, tightened breathing, or a drifting sensation as if they were sinking into the theater seat. Some insisted that the sound design, especially the deep, oscillating pulses in the hallucination montages, seemed to synchronize with their heartbeat. A few even claimed they felt lighter or unanchored when standing up after the film, as though gravity had momentarily loosened its grip. The film's rapid alternation between frenetic imagery and sudden silence contributed to reports of micro blackouts, brief moments where viewers couldn't remember a cut or transition, only the feeling of emerging into a new scene. Psychologists at the time attributed this to sensory overload, but old anecdotes from projectionists said that audiences looked glassy-eyed during certain sequences, blinking as though waking from short trances. Things changed noticeably once the digital remastering began. Blu-ray viewers consistently described the film as visually striking but no longer disorienting. The hallucination sequences appeared sharper but less overwhelming, the color strobing more uniform, and the swirling composites less erratic. Some fans insisted that the analog imperfection of the theatrical print grain flicker, inconsistent exposure, and unstable cross-dissolves contributed heavily to the original altered state sensations. A longtime editor once suggested that early test reels included experimental frame rate blending meant to evoke dissociative effects, though he later admitted the technique proved unreliable and was abandoned. Whether remnants of that process survived into the theatrical release remains an open question. Whatever the cause, viewers exposed to the earliest showings of altered states maintain that the film briefly nudged their consciousness toward the edge of something primal, an internal shiver of identity slipping, reforming, and returning just in time for the lights to rise. 7. Phase 4 1974. Upon release, Phase 4 puzzled audiences with its methodical pacing, but early viewers reported unusual visual after effects unrelated to confusion. The film's macro photography, extreme close-ups of ants, geometric formations, and uncanny symmetries seemed to linger in the mind with unusual persistence. Some described seeing patterned shapes in ordinary textures for hours afterward. Tile floors arranged themselves into hexagons, shadows aligned into unnatural lines, and even tree branches appeared structured with mathematical precision. Several viewers recounted experiencing mild pareidolia. They claimed to perceive movement in peripheral vision, tiny flickers in corners of rooms that vanished. When looked at directly, one woman insisted she heard faint chittering sounds later that night, though no insects were present. Psychologists attributed these reactions to the film's highly rhythmic editing, which alternates between abstract geometry and looming stillness, subtly manipulating cognitive expectation. The most intriguing phenomenon came from those who watched the original 1974 prints. They reported that the film's final sequence, the infamous surreal ending suppressed for years, created a cascading sense of dissociation, as though their surroundings began adopting the film's visual language. When the restored version finally surfaced decades later, many fans insisted the new transfer felt too stable, too polished, lacking the raw visual intensity that once made the ending almost hallucinatory. Some theorized that the original prints used a color process prone to microscopic instability, producing organic pulses and flickers that heightened the film's hypnotic qualities. These artifacts would have disappeared in digital restoration, smoothing out what once felt alive and unsettling. Rumors persist that director Saul Bass experimented with subliminal imagery during early test edits. Nothing confirmed, nothing provable, but the legend endures. For those who saw Phase 4 in its earliest form, the movie didn't simply depict an evolutionary leap in perception. It subtly coaxed audiences to feel that shift, if only for a fleeting, disquieting moment. 8. Videodrome 1983. When Videodrome premiered, critics focused on its surreal body horror imagery, but early viewers fixated on something far stranger, lingering sensory distortions after leaving the theater. Several people claimed they saw faint ripples in television screens at home, subtle warping that resembled the iconic breathing effect from the film. Others reported hearing slight static pulses in quiet rooms, as though the film's signal had followed them outside the auditorium. Even a few seasoned cinephiles admitted they experienced momentary shifts in depth perception, as if objects in the real world were flexing with a barely perceptible hum. Much of this was attributed to the movie's experimental sound layering. Low-frequency tones blend with jagged bursts of static throughout the film, creating a cognitive dissonance that some described as psychological interference. One viewer recalled feeling certain the dialogue had begun overlapping inside his head, not on the screen. Another said the room felt unusually dim for nearly an hour after the show ended, despite stepping into bright daylight. When the film transitioned to DVD and later Blu-ray, these unusual reactions dwindled. The restored versions lacked the murky analog imperfections of the original film, reel's grain patterns, subtle tracking errors, and unstable color fields that may have contributed to the perceptual disturbances. Fans who had seen Videodrome during its early run insisted the distortions weren't merely due to aging film stock, but something embedded in the aesthetic itself, an unintentional hypnotic rhythm generated by a confluence of sound, texture, and pacing. A former technician once suggested that the theatrical prints used a mastering process with inconsistent exposure, causing microflickers invisible to the conscious eye but detectable subconsciously. If true, these flickers vanished with digital remastering, Stripping the film of its unintended power, those who experienced the original Videodrome screenings maintain that the movie didn't just critique media's influence, it briefly exerted that influence, altering how viewers perceive screens, light, and even silence for a short but unforgettable moment. 9. The Fountain, 2006. When The Fountain first screened, audiences described an experience that bordered on spiritual disorientation. Many said they felt time compress and expand within single scenes, especially during transitions between the film's three parallel narratives. The amber light, circular camera motion, and unusually organic visual effects created a trance-like rhythm that some viewers said they couldn't shake for days. A handful even claimed they saw golden particles drifting at the edges of their vision when stepping outside the theater, as if fragments of the film's dying star had followed them into the real world. Dream patterns seemed particularly affected. Numerous reports described recurring loops falling through golden space, floating beside the Tree of Life, or sinking into warm pools of black. One viewer insisted that after watching the film, he awakened at dawn with the sensation of orbiting something luminous. Though he could not recall any actual dream, psychologists chalked these reactions up to the film's circular editing structure, but none could explain why the sensations were so widespread among early viewers. Curiously, when the Blu-ray edition arrived, many of these reports evaporated. Fans revisiting the film noted that the pacing felt more grounded, the transitions less hypnotic, and the light diffusion somewhat reduced. The visual bloom, once overwhelming in the theatrical cut, appeared tamed. Some speculated that the original projection prints exaggerated the film's golden highlights, while others insisted subtle digital sharpening removed the soft edges responsible for its dreamlike quality. There were rumors from within the effects team of an abandoned early color process that produced unstable textures when blown up to theatrical scale. These textures, they said, accidentally mimicked meditative visual stimuli. If true, the remastered version likely corrected them, inadvertently erasing the film's strange perceptual influence. To this day, some insist the first cut of The Fountain momentarily aligned their minds with the film's temporal loops, a cinematic mandala that briefly taught viewers what it meant to drift outside linear time. 10. Upstream Color, 2013. When Upstream Color debuted at Sundance, critics praised its hypnotic editing, but viewers left the theater reporting something far more unusual: memory disruption. Many insisted they could not recall the middle portion of the film with any clarity, as though their minds had simply drifted away from consciousness during key sequences, not out of boredom, but a kind of involuntary dissociation. They remembered emotions, textures, and sounds, but not coherent events. The sensation persisted even upon rewatch, leaving some convinced the film intentionally manipulated cognitive focus. Central to these reactions was the film's rhythmic montage structure. Scenes bleed into each other through sound bridges, microcuts, and visual echoes that feel almost subliminal. Some viewers described hearing the pig farm audio cues for hours afterward, especially the rhythmic thumping that underscores Chris and Jeff's shared trauma. Others said their dreams briefly adopted the film's language, fragmented tableaus of water, soil, and circular motion. One man reported waking up the next morning unable to distinguish whether a memory of a blue-tinted room was from his own life or the movie. Confusion deepened when the Blu-ray release arrived. Fans noted that the new transfer felt smoother, more polished, and, strangely, easier to follow. Some subtle sound textures seemed toned down, the pacing less disorienting, the transitions more consciously readable. Those who experienced the theatrical cut insisted these changes erased the peculiar trance-like state the film once induced. A rumor circulated that director Shane Carruth originally mixed the film using an experimental layering process that created accidental phase cancellations in certain frequencies, leading to the uncanny lost time sensation. Later mastering may have corrected these anomalies, unintentionally removing the film's psychosensory edge. To this day, viewers of the original run share a quiet, persistent belief. Upstream Color didn't merely depict stolen identity or fragmented perception. For a brief moment in its earliest form, it caused audiences to misplace pieces of their own memory. 11. Annihilation, 2018. From its earliest screenings, Annihilation generated reports that bordered on psychological case studies. Viewers described the shimmer sequences, those surreal washes of refracted light and shifting geometry, as producing an odd tightening in the chest, a sensation halfway between awe and unease. Several said that for minutes at a time, they lost sense of whether the soundtrack was external or internal, especially during the notorious creature encounter, where low-frequency pulses seemed to echo from inside the skull. More unusual, however, were reports of visual distortion after leaving the theater. Some people claimed they kept seeing soft color halos around reflective surfaces, car windows, metal railings, even puddles. A few said their dreams became unnervingly vivid, filled with warped landscapes or rippling sky patterns reminiscent of the shimmer's boundary. One viewer swore that for an entire week, she felt the edges of objects vibrating slightly, as if reality were glitching. But once the Blu-ray version released, the collective experience shifted. Many fans described the new transfer as flatter, less enveloping, and lacking the strange perceptual after effects they remembered. The color gradients seemed smoother, the eerie sound design more contained, and the disorientation once considered the film's signature had dissipated. Discussions online suggested that early theatrical showings used an experimental HDR implementation that amplified visual bloom beyond the director's intention. Though no official confirmation exists, adding to the mystery, a post-production employee anonymously claimed that the original mix included frequency artifacts unintentionally introduced during sound layering, which could create spatial confusion. If true, these artifacts may have been removed during remastering, erasing the film's unintended psychological footprint. Today, fans debate whether Annihilation ever truly altered perception or whether audiences simply wanted the shimmer to follow them home. Yet the earliest viewers remain convinced something in those first screenings felt alive, aware, and quietly bending reality. 12. Coherence, 2013. When Coherence premiered, audiences expected a low-budget sci-fi mystery. What they didn't expect was the unnerving sense that the film continued rearranging itself inside their memory long after the credits rolled. Early viewers frequently reported that certain scenes, particularly the repeated door knocks, the dinner conversations, or the transitions between the dimly lit houses, felt different when they rewatched the film. Many were convinced that line deliveries shifted, pauses lengthened, or props subtly changed positions, yet no alternate cuts were ever documented, leaving only the unsettling possibility that the movie's core premise was somehow bleeding into perception. A curious subset of viewers described location confusion. They swore that exterior shots of the street looked different each time. A house seemed farther away, a lamppost brighter, the sidewalk longer. One viewer claimed that after watching the film, he stepped outside and felt, momentarily, as if his own neighborhood had rearranged itself by a few meters. Others mentioned déjà vu, triggered by simple objects like glow sticks, which they insisted felt out of place even when encountered in daily life. The strangest reports came from those who watched the early digital release. Many said they remembered a particular exchange during the dinner scene, an uneasy silence after M's question that seemed to vanish entirely when they viewed the Blu-ray edition. Fans dissected both versions frame by frame, unable to find any concrete discrepancy, yet collectively agreeing something felt cleaner and less fractured in the updated transfer. Behind the scenes, there were rumors that the movie's original improvised dialogue created micro-pauses and accidental overlaps that disrupted cognitive mapping. These anomalies may have been softened in later sound remastering, unintentionally erasing the very qualities that disoriented early viewers. Whatever the cause, a persistent belief remains. Coherence didn't just depict fractured realities, it momentarily made its audience unsure of their own. 13. Primer, 2004. Primer is known for its complexity, but what many early viewers reported went beyond confusion. Not only did they struggle to follow the film's branching timelines, some claimed the movie distorted their sense of time altogether. A number of first-run theatergoers described looking down at their phones after the credits and discovering that far more or far less time had passed than expected. Several insisted the middle portion of the film seemed to jump, as if their minds skipped over a few minutes without noticing. This wasn't the usual disorientation that comes from a dense plot. Some engineers, ironically the movie's target audience, described leaving the theater with the uncanny impression that certain conversations in the film happened twice, Others said they remembered scenes involving the storage unit or the second machine differently on rewatch, dialogue rearranged, pauses extended, gestures altered. No officially documented alternate cut exists, but the nature of the film made such memories difficult to challenge. As Primer moved to DVD and later high-definition streaming, viewers noticed something else. The strange perceptual effects were gone. The pacing felt more rigid, the edits cleaner, and the sound less empty. Devoted fans who had seen the theatrical version insisted the VHS-era audio mix had subtle inconsistencies, tiny dropouts, overlapping ambient tones that created a fractured mental rhythm, mirroring the plot's temporal instability. One long-standing rumor claims that Carruth's original hard drives suffered partial data corruption, requiring some scenes to be reconstructed from multiple near-identical takes. Whether this contributed to the earliest audience reactions is impossible to prove, but those who experienced the film in its first run swear that Primer once felt like a conceptual trap, a movie about unstable timelines that briefly made your timeline feel unstable too. Even today, some fans privately admit they remember a version of Primer. No one else can verify an inadvertent Mandela effect born from a film already obsessed with fractured memory. 14. Beyond the Black Rainbow, 2010. From the moment its first quiet hum vibrated through a theater's speakers, Beyond the Black Rainbow positioned itself as more than a retro sci-fi fever dream. Early viewers described a creeping sensation of time, stretching, slowing, and then tightening again, as though the film were breathing beside them. The hypnotic synth drones, the oppressive reds, and the unnaturally symmetrical framing combined into something that didn't merely unsettle it, entranced. Some attendees claimed the movie felt half as long as its runtime, others insisted it felt twice as long. Neither group was able to explain why. A number of viewers posted online that the film altered their perception of color for hours afterward. They described shadows appearing too warm, streetlights glowing with an unnatural tint, and a persistent sense that everyday spaces resembled forgotten corners of the Arborea Institute. One viewer recounted walking into a supermarket and feeling as if the aisles were graded in the same palette as the film. Another claimed he heard faint modulated tones in quiet rooms, identical to the audio textures used during Elena's containment scenes. When the film transitioned to Blu-ray, something changed. Fans who revisited it insisted the edits felt cleaner, the pacing less suffocating, and even the score slightly different, though no official documentation acknowledges any alteration. Some argued the transfer smoothed out intentional artifacts from the original print, accidental or otherwise, erasing the disorienting qualities that had defined the theatrical experience. A rumor persists about an early test screening where several viewers reportedly experienced mild dissociation, prompting fine-tuning in the audio mix before release. No proof has surfaced, yet devoted fans maintain that the earliest cut of Beyond the Black Rainbow behaved more like a psychological device than a film. Theatrical viewers remember something the digital version simply doesn't carry, an atmospheric pressure that made reality feel briefly misaligned. 15. Enter the Void, 2009. For years, viewers have insisted that Enter the Void did something to their perception in ways no other sci-fi film managed. Reports from early theatrical screenings describe a sensation that hovered between lucid dreaming and sensory dislocation, particularly during the long point-of-view transitions, drifting between memory, imagination, and something resembling the afterlife. Some audience members claimed they left the theater unsure how long the movie actually lasted. Others walked out feeling as though they had seen fragments of their own past, projected between Gaspar Noé's neon spirals. The earliest complaints or confessions focused on dreams. People who watched the film only once said they revisited its imagery at night with startling clarity, floating above Tokyo streets, falling through fluorescent hallways, or drifting in circular patterns that matched the strobing lights of the Rainbow Club. Several insisted these dreams continued for weeks, long after the story should have faded. A minor academic paper even compared the visual structure of the film to guided hypnagogia, though the term was later removed in a revision. What unsettled fans most came later, when the film was remastered for digital platforms. The color grading softened slightly, the strobing sequences appeared less aggressive, and the rhythm of certain transitions felt noticeably gentler. Nothing in the official notes suggests a deliberate alteration, but viewers began posting side-by-side comparisons, showing differences they swore weren't subtle. With these changes, the strange side effects disappeared. No more neon dreams, no more drifting sensations, just a visually bold film that no longer behaved like the one people remembered. A long-running rumor claims the original DCP files were corrupted, forcing Noé to reconstruct certain sequences from incomplete backups. Whether true or not, early viewers remain convinced. The first version of Enter the Void didn't just depict altered consciousness, it temporarily instilled it. Bonus fact, the Kirlian frequency 2017 present. Long before rumors formed around its cult status, early viewers of the Kirlian frequency whispered about a phenomenon they called the echo. This wasn't fear nor confusion, it was a lingering resonance, a feeling that something from the show continued broadcasting long after the screen went dark. Several viewers reported hearing faint tonal hums hours later, especially when alone at night. Others described brief flashes of the show's distinctive color palette appearing in their peripheral vision, neon blues, deep violets, and sickly greens that vanished when looked at directly. The strangest reports came from those who watched the earliest online releases. Before the series gained traction, they insisted that certain episodes felt different when they revisited them months later, pacing altered, dialogue rephrased, scenes missing or reappearing. Yet each official upload matched perfectly with archived versions. Some chalked it up to faulty memory, but the frequency of the reports suggested something more elusive. A perception shaped not only by what the series showed, but by the uncanny atmosphere it generated. When the show expanded to streaming services, these experiences diminished. The richer color correction, smoother motion, and stabilized audio eliminated the rough edges that early audiences believed were responsible for the psychological after effects. A few dedicated fans still hunt for lost uploads, claiming they remember early cuts that no one else can verify, episodes with distorted transitions, extended silences, or inexplicable audio artifacts. The series creators have never confirmed alternate edits, though one cryptic comment in an interview referenced episodes that only existed for a few hours. Whether a joke or something else, no one knows. What remains is the belief that the Kirlian frequency, in its earliest and rawest form, behaved less like a show and more like a signal, one that didn't simply occupy the screen, but briefly occupied the viewer's mind. If any of these films ever left you seeing colors differently, dreaming in unfamiliar rhythms, or questioning the shape of a moment, you're not alone. For decades, audiences have quietly compared notes, discovering that certain stories do more than entertain. They leave impressions that don't fade when the credits do. If you've ever felt a shift in perception after watching a film, share your experience below. Your comment might match someone else's memory, or contradict it entirely. And if you want us to continue opening files like this, records of movies that seem to think back, subscribe, leave a sign, and stay with us, the next anomaly is already in motion.